In this lecture, we're going to register the user by submitting their data to Firebase. We're going to need to turn on the authentication feature in Firebase before we can do so. Otherwise, Firebase will reject any authentication attempts we make. Open the Firebase console for your project. On the sidebar, click on Authentication. Firebase will give us the following message: authenticate and manage users from a variety of providers without server-side code. Nowadays, many platforms allow users to register to other sites by sending their data to the site they'd like to register to. It's quick, easy, and flexible. Some examples of platforms that provide this service are Facebook, Twitter, and Google. These companies are what Firebase is referring to when it uses the word provider. To view the list of providers, we can switch to the Sign In Method tab. Firebase supports multiple platforms out of the box. The method we'll select is the email method. Enable it, but don't enable the passwordless option. We want to be able to store the password. After enabling it, click Save. The status will change to Enabled. We can start adding users to our Firebase application. We'll want to do so through Firebase's API. The next step is to send the data to Firebase. We already have an instance of Firebase that'll help us do that. In your editor, open the Register Form component. Scroll down to the Register function. This function is where we handle the registration submission. We've already taken care of adding the alert messages. We'll use the Firebase instance to send the data. However, the Firebase instance is not available in the component. We'll need to import it. At the top of the script block, import the Firebase instance. It's important that we're importing the Firebase file we created in the previous lecture. We don't want to import the Firebase module mistakenly. They are not the same. One simple trick for making sure you're importing files from the source directory is to use the @ character. Webpack will replace the @ character in import statements with the path to the source directory. There are two benefits to this. It saves you from having to move up multiple directories if your files are nested. Secondly, you don't have to update the import statements in the file if you move it to another directory. The import statements will still be able to import the files you want. We are going to use the @ character in our components whenever possible. Go back to the register function definition. We're going to write the code in between the message alert updates. The first thing we'll do is invoke the Firebase.auth function. The auth function will return an object with methods and properties we can use to communicate with the authentication service. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the Authentication SDK documentation page. Firebase tells us the following: do not call this constructor directly. Instead, use Firebase.auth. In most examples, you will find Firebase creating an object using the Firebase.auth function. This function will give you access to the properties and methods listed on this documentation page. The method we'll want to use is called createUser with email and password. Click on it from the list. According to the documentation, it expects the email and password as arguments. The returned value is a promise. The promise will give us an object with the user's credentials if the authentication was a success. The description says the following about the function: creates a new user account associated with the specified email address and password. On successful creation of the user account, this user will also be signed into your application. User account creation can fail if the account already exists or the password is invalid. This one note is important. Firebase will automatically log the user in if their account was created successfully. We'll want to reload the app if that's the case. Reading further, we'll find a list of possible errors. Lastly, there's an example we can use. We won't use the example they provide. We're going to take a slightly different approach than the default example. Let's go back to the editor. We're going to chain the create user with email and password function. This function will return a promise, but I don't want to chain the then or catch functions. Instead, we'll use the async await keywords. Before the register function name, add the async keyword. We'll add the await keyword before the Firebase function. The create user function will send a request to Firebase with the information you've provided it. If successful, will be returned with the user's credentials. We'll want to store these credentials to keep the user logged in. We're going to assign the response to a variable called user credentials. We can't forget about the arguments. We'll pass those in next. The documentation says the first argument is the email and the second is the password. Both values are stored in the values parameter. We are provided the values from the submit event. We don't need to store the values in a data object. We'll pass in both values to their respective arguments. The values from the fields can be retrieved by their names we assigned them. The property names correspond to the name attributes on the field components. With this one function, we're able to completely register the user in the system. In the next lecture, we'll look at handling the response.